I can't show my 50 PowerPoint slides.
I was doing good. No. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We're a couple minutes late getting going, but we have an exciting session this afternoon. I'm so glad to see so many of you here. They did move us to the auditorium because we have, this set of rock stars up here, all in one place. And I will aging. If you didn't see the notice this morning, the session is now being live streamed. So for those who couldn't make it, which is wonderful, and Kate and I at the end will talk a little bit about what we're going to do after this point, and we're going to send around a little sign-up sheet if you are interested in getting whatever summary we produce from this session. If you'd like us to send that to you, then we'll have you provide your email address at the end of the session. So first of all, I will introduce myself and Kate. I'm Janet Loback. I'm currently sort of homeless. I'm from Canada. I'm shortly joining the team at Cornell, which I'm very excited. Yes, woohoo! And I'm the co-chair with Kate of the Children and Youth Environments Network. So Kate Bishop is in Sydney at the University of New South Wales, and she came all the way across the ocean to join us for this very special 50th anniversary session. So first of all, I'm just going to quickly give you an overview of the session. So we're going to do a little introduction about why we're here and an overview of who we've got here in front of us. We're going to focus at the beginning on some discussions with the panel, really looking back over the 50 years of children and youth environments research. Then we're going to, if we can manage it, this is a little bit different format than we had originally planned, but we're going to have some smaller group discussions about where we are now and where we're headed. And our panelists are going to sort of disperse themselves amongst the audience during that conversation and then bring some of those discussions back with them for the final session. We're going to be talking about where we are, but where are we going, and what maybe should be our priorities, or what are the greatest opportunities that we may have in the next couple of decades of CYE research. And then we'll talk about next steps at the very end. Okay, so our very distinguished panel here. I'm going to just talk loudly because I can't scroll at the same time. So I will start on the overview here. We have Louise Chawla, who is a program at the University of Colorado Boulder, with a doctorate in environmental psychology and a master's degree in education and child development. Her research areas are children in nature, children in cities, and the development of committed action for the environment. So welcome, Louise. Next we have another colleague from across the pond. We have Helen Woolley, who is a chartered landscape architect and reader in Landscape Architecture and Society in the Department of Sheffield. She has researched children and young people's outdoor environments for 25 plus years. You don't look so, Helen. And has an interest in how policy and practice, usually controlled by adults, influences children's outdoor environments. She's increasingly interested in how environments are provided and experienced in challenging contexts, such as post-disaster or crisis situations, and rapid urbanization. So welcome, Helen. Thank you for coming all this way. Next to Helen, we have Gary Evans, who is an environmental and developmental psychologist, currently the Elizabeth Lee Vincent Professor of Human Ecology at Cornell. Gary's scholarship is focused on the physical environment and child well-being, and much of his work has been focused on the environment of childhood poverty. Next, we have Patsy Eubanks Owens, who is a professor of landscape architecture at the University of California, Davis. She served as the chair or the co-chair of the CYE network for many years, and her research focuses on youth environments, particularly how the physical environment can support healthy adolescent development, and on youth engagement in design and policy development. Welcome, Patsy. And next to Patsy, we have Roger Hart, who is a professor of psychology, geography, and social welfare, and the director of the Center for Human Environments and the Children's Environments Research Group at the Graduate Center at the City University of New York. He his broad concern with fulfilling children's rights through finding ways to better understand their lives and their perspectives. Much of his work is focused on the quality of the physical environment for children, with the goal of helping to improve conditions for those living in difficult circumstances. And he's currently completing Revisiting Childhood, a longitudinal study of the environment and childhood in one town over 2 generations. That's a way you can talk about. You've got a few things coming out about that you can share as well. And then we have Dr. Lorraine Maxwell, who's an environmental psychologist. Do we need it? Okay. In the Department of Design and Environmental Analysis at Cornell as well. Her current research examines ways in which the physical environment signals stigma to adolescents. And she teaches the design programming course for the department and a graduate seminar in theories of human-environment relations. Welcome, Lorraine. And last but not least, Robin Moore is professor of landscape architecture and co-founder, director of the Natural Learning Initiative in the College of Design at North Carolina State University. Since 2000, he has guided NLI in pioneering an interdisciplinary environment and behavior approach to built environment design and action research for children and families in underserved communities in North Carolina and beyond. Robin is an international authority on the intergenerational design of urban play and learning environments with a focus on exposure to nature, and is a consultant to governmental and nonprofit organizations as well as leading design firms. So thank you all for being here. We're excited about the conversations that this group will have. Many of you have been working together with each other for many years, and so we're excited about the insights you'll be able to share with us today. I'm going to hand it over to Kate, who is going to introduce our first part. We may possibly, I should just mention about the Children and Youth Environments Network at EDRA. You guys can correct me because some of you were there from the beginning. I believe it's, if not the longest running, one of the longest running networks, and if not the largest, one of the largest networks in EDRA. And there are, I've heard a few different origin stories about CYE, so those of you who are here in the early days may enlighten us about how it evolved, but it remains a very robust network within EDRA, and we hope to, with all of your help, we hope to continue that over the next 50 years. So, Kate, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Janet, and I'd like to publicly thank Janet for all the work she does behind the scenes for this network. Every network really needs a fantastic champion, and EDRA is very blessed to have Janet at the helm of this particular network. I just play a backup follow on, low-key role here. So let me tell you a little bit more. I think I don't know the group. About what's going on today. You have this is a day in 3 parts. The first part, we're going to ask the panel to reflect on the last 50 years, no less, in about 30 minutes. And then we're going to give you all, guys, a go at telling us what you think the current challenges are, and if there are time, the gaps and emerging trends from your own research in this area. And then we're going to come back and put the panel back under the white hot spotlight and allow you all to ask them many questions as we try and nut out emerging trends and directions forward and recognizing contemporary opportunities in this field. So please save your questions until the end. Can I also say, for you all, if you're all interested in children, youth and environments, there's a fantastic display of books up the back and flyers to take with you to collect a magnificent display of publications in this space that have come out in the last few years. So don't waste the opportunity to pick up all the new material. All right. We gave the panel a sort of cheat sheet in advance, and we asked them to consider, which I'm sure they've done very diligently, all our questions for each session so that they could be prepared for us. The first question on my sheet Janet's altered them slightly. We've asked them to nominate their most powerful contribution, personal contribution, and identify some of the most significant moments in the history of this area of research, and to talk a bit about the key drivers for this area of research. But I'm actually going to reverse that order and start with the key drivers in this space from your perspectives. And I might ask both Roger and Patsy to think about leading this discussion for the moment from your different perspectives. Roger, head in hand. What are some of the key drivers? You'll have to pick up a mic. Everybody has to get good at this because it only is recorded if we use the mic.
I thought we were thinking kind of early history. Okay, the key drivers.
For the early history.
You can be sure that this is from the top of my head, which is probably the most honest way to get it, right? Instead of one carefully considered. I mean, I did consider the stuff you sent us, but I got it in a different. I didn't remember the key drivers part.
It's okay.
But it's pretty easy to do it because the key drivers are sitting around me right here. So, you know, I came to this country to work on squatter settlements in a geography department, but I happened to land in a place that was deciding that it should really merge half of its program with psychology. So Clark University was a place for experimenting with those ideas. And I think that what happened to me is once I found that I was working with children, which took only a couple of months, I knew I was going to do that for the rest of my life. Then I started to discover the people who were sitting at this table. So my own work has been involved working very closely with children and initially listening to them through ethnographic research and participation. So I know that better. And I don't feel that there's been a lot that's been achieved in ethnographic research with children. So I wouldn't put that on the top of my list. I think that the work that Robin and I tried to do to foster children's participation has taken off in a big way. Less because of us, more because of the United Nations and the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, but it does mean that we can feel fairly good that there's been progress made there. I never wanted to be an academic. I never expected to be in a university for my career. I always wanted to affect change, and so I've always tried to tread a line between the practitioners and research. And so some of my heroes are Sherry Bartlett, who should be here today, very close colleague in our research group, but also working in IID in London. She does a kind of work that is so important that we often don't realize, which is instead of initial research, it's a synthesis of all that we know and applying it to the domain of children's environments. And that's a profound contribution. So she'd be near the top of my list. But we're not talking about people, we're talking about ideas here, but it can't help but doing the people part. Gary has so systematically followed his training to do very careful work, experimental research and field experimental research, which is relevant to our questions, which means that when we have to defend ourselves with clear evidence, we've got somewhere to go. And that's wonderful. But then, you know, there's domains that we're now making giant strides with that I didn't think we would before. Louise and the whole children and nature area, and of course, you know, Helen's work connects to that in landscape, and that work is really growing by leaps and bounds, and it needs to. That sounds like it's all great, but you've told me not to talk about the things that haven't happened, right? I have to save that.
All I'm looking for is comments at the moment on some of the main influences that bring together the nexus and the genesis around CYE and what drives that.
CYE's been an important place, even though I haven't been coming to EDRA. I observe it and I talk with EDRAites. I was there at the beginning, but I stopped going to conferences quite a long while ago, except for EDRA. And then even gave up on EDRA when I had children, because there's no time for anything but children when you have children. So. Ironically.
Patsy, would you like to add?
Yes, I'll add. So I have a 30-year history, not a 50-year history. But that just a little bit from my personal understanding, thinking about the driver and where I saw things developing is like many of you, I suspect, right? I first learned about EDRA as a graduate student, and to me, one of the drivers were the people already positioned in the field, right? Having someone like Mark Francis say, you really should go to EDRA. And my question is, what is EDRA? And then being able to go and realizing, you know, you're in the elevator with Amos Rappaport and you're picking your chin up off the floor. And I've been seeing that this morning. You know, young people say, oh, I read your article. And so to me, it's having that wonderful network and drawing. And I wanted to give a shout out because when I first went to EDRA, the peers I found were actually the grad students at CUNY. And they were the students that I spent time with. And it was there that I met Michael Kahn. And Michael was also doing research on adolescence. And I think for us, we felt a lot of power at that time because there really wasn't research on adolescence, right? A few people had made commentary about how we needed. Florence Ladd had this wonderful quote that I can't remember right now about the importance of looking at, you know, adolescence and how it is different than young people and children. And so that was something that was really, that we saw this need and really being able to work together and thinking about that. So to me, one of the drivers is having each other. And to me, that's something that's continued my work. Helen and I were reminiscing this morning. We think we probably had the first email collaboration on children and youth environments. Early 90s, right? We found out about each other's work, and we were emailing when I was still on Unix system, or yeah, it was like some very arcane, but we found each other, right? And to me, that's you guys have no excuse for not finding each other, because to me, that's where some of the really great ideas and being able to sit around and talk about these things. And the drivers, we'll talk about this a bit when we talk about the future, but a lot of the drivers, I can still see some commonalities from when I looked back. Roger generously, when I first started my teaching career, I don't know if you remember, it gave me a huge stack of all the children's quarterlies from years ago. And so I started going through all of those and looking at the table of contents. And so that's really interesting, sort of giving that context. But, you know, sort of giving the shout out to Robin and to Roger too. I remember at Black Mountain having a really great discussion. And that conference was organized a little bit differently, where we all spent a day together and we had a very informal session and talking about all the things that were issued to us. And then we had the field trip. And Roger and I ended up being on the same trip. And we were sitting on the bus, and I'm, you know, second year in my teaching career, and just like picking his brain about everything. And so to me, you know, the whole idea of what's the driver behind the network, it really is all the people and the things that they do, and coming up with, you know, really thinking about the questions and what else can we do to advance what we know to improve the environments for young people. So I'm going to leave it there because I know there's lots of things for people to talk about.
Thank you, Patsy. Helen, CYE research in the UK, does it share a similar history to the US, or do different things motivate its development and its changes of direction?
We don't have a specific network in the UK.
I really mean just the area of research when I say that.
Research is, in the past, it's been really, it hasn't, where do I start on this? I, like Roger, was not expecting to be an academic. I was expecting to be a landscape architect, practitioner, change things. So I've always kept some relationship with practitioners and others who have an interest in children's play, so the play sector, who have been part of the driving force for seeking change about outdoor environments. So they're sort of part of a network, together with the people who have been almost managing parks, and they have been a driver for wanting to see better outdoor environments for children. So those, in order to do that, they've needed an evidence base, and that has sometimes been the driver, in fact. But can I say that I think underlying all this driving EDRA, and there is a disadvantage in being on the other side of the pond, because my connection with CYE and EDRA hasn't been every year. I can't afford to come over every year. And that's a real regret in a way. But one of the drivers is just the heart of everybody for making better environments for children and for enabling children's voice to be heard, and that has really come through in the work that CYE has done. So I think that's a really big driver. It's about making environments better for children, allowing children to be involved in that process as well. And as I say, I'm sad that we don't have one big network in the UK, but there are some people, and we seem to know quite a lot of them in different areas. And then what we've also discovered is that it isn't just people whose natural interest is children and their outdoor environments, perhaps who've doing the research, but people who have picked up on the health agenda. And in the last 15 or 20 years, they're not part of a children's network, environmental network, but they're doing research about health that's feeding into the evidence base for trying to make changes. Does that
Thank
help
you,
a bit?
Helen.
Yep.
Excellent. Lorraine, Patsy's begun to touch on the emergence of youth as a particular focus within children and youth and environments, but it's much later to the table than children. What do you think were some of the drivers that made that a potent issue and you know, that of a research focus across the world?
Around youth,
Around youth as opposed to children.
as opposed to children. I think several things. One, often youth or teenagers, adolescents, are often forgotten in terms of places for them. That parents can be advocates for younger children. They take them to the park, or they think about playgrounds, they think about parks. And the general public thinks about playgrounds. Playgrounds are for children, but there are no playgrounds for adolescents. Adolescents, teenagers are in the way. They're to be avoided by adults. I know when I'm from New York City, and for those of you who don't know, I'm also a graduate of the CUNY Environmental Psych program. Roger Hart was on my dissertation committee, but anyway, we when I moved to Ithaca, there's a place called the Commons, which is a pedestrian way with stores on either side, and some of the long-time Ithacans adults told me, well, don't go to the Commons, there's a lot of strange things happening there. And I'm thinking, yeah, how strange could it be? I come from New York City. But anyway, so I would go, but they were just high school kids, some of whom had pink hair, some of whom had blue hair, jeans were torn, you know, okay, these people are not frightening. You know, the point is that we often forget our own adolescence and the things that we went through, and adolescents need a place to gather, need a place to see and to be seen. You know, they really want to be seen by each other, by adults. They're becoming adults. They want to be around adults, even if they don't admit it, because they're beginning to develop an adult self. But adults and the general public shy away from them. You know, in groups, they seem to be threatening, some perhaps more than others. But many of us on this panel, Patsy, and especially, and in my more recent work, also myself, are thinking of, you know, where can adolescents be, and in terms of the physical space. And so I think that that's been a driver for the CYE network in helping us to remember that spaces are not just for, quote, children up to the age of about 10, but for adolescents as well, and that their environments, their spaces are things we need to think about, but not just think about, that they have a voice into what they think about those spaces. And I can talk later about some of the work I've been doing perhaps, but they have thoughts about the spaces that they're in and about the spaces that allow them to be, and what spaces they would like to have. And so I think that has definitely been a driver as part of the CYE network, and that's why it's called children-youth environments. It's not just the child care environment or the children's environments. And I think that that's really important.
Thank you very much, Lorraine. Louise and Gary, I'm going to shift to the question behind you now, because we've started a bit late, so it's all a bit foreshortened. Sorry about that. I'd like you to think about what have been some of the most influential and innovative developments in your association with this field of work across the last decades that you've been involved. Louise, you can kick it off.
I'll speak to one, which is, I think it's already come up, the growing coming together of the public health field and the understanding of how critical environments are for public health. And again, Gary Evans, you made great contributions to that. But I've been really drawn into it through the nature side of it. And a colleague of mine in Colorado, Jill Litt, approached me and asked if I would help her write the American Public Health Association policy paper, policy statement on access to nature for health and well-being, and we did that together. So that's definitely, I think, a whole area of coming together from public health and environmental psychology, and then really trying to understand, okay, how do places work, and how, if nature is so, access to nature is so important for people's health and well-being as a routine part of their lives, how do we physically bring it in, and then how do we understand when people will actually use it, because just because a park is within a 10-minute walk of where you live doesn't mean people are using the park. So what determines that? So I think they're facing all of these questions that environmental psychology has been grappling with, and especially in terms of children and youth. And we have growing research now of like adolescent depression and aggression being less where they have access to nature in urban spaces. And so I think that growing together of the public health field and the design research field is a real area for strength that has been emerging over this last maybe certainly 10 of the 50 years, and I'll just speak to that one right now.
Thank you, Louise. There's much more. You could, yes. Go for your life, Gary.
For me, I think one of the most significant intellectual contributions has been Urie Bronfenbrenner's bioecological model of human development. And at the same time, I actually think it links to one of the most significant gaps, which is a question we're going to get to a little late in the groups and later on, in the sense that I think the empirical work does not match up very well with the theory. And part of that, I think, is because it's a theory that really makes you take seriously systems thinking. And many of us have, I think, tried to do systems thinking oriented research, and it's really, really hard to do that. So I think Bronfenbrenner's conceptualization about different nested systems and environments that children are in, and this whole important issue of time, which is something I'm going to come back and talk about later. I think developmental psychology within psychology has handled time pretty well, and within the social sciences, I think geography has also contributed quite a bit. But we still have trouble, I think, with time, how to measure it, how to conceptualize it. I think that's a really interesting challenge.
Thank you very much, Gary. Robin, can't leave you out here. I'm going to ask you, you're welcome to toss in an influential moment if you wish, but I'm actually going to ask you to kick off the personal project you've been part of that you're most proud of, you think it's had the greatest impact. There are many of us, I'm sure, in the room who work with several hats on, research, policy perhaps, research, practice perhaps. And for many of us, understanding the impact of our work beyond our research is significant for us in terms of what we register as success and achievement, and also for our institutions if we're academics. And this has become the new discussion. How does your work matter? Where does it land? How does it contribute to the world at large? And all of the people sitting here have had magnificent bits of work that have done precisely that. Changed policy, changed practice, changed the way we conceptualise research, which is wonderful. Congratulations. But you can kick off this discussion, Robin, with something you think has really, you've enjoyed because it's made a difference.
So I'll try to stumble my way through some thoughts here. First and foremost, I think of myself as a designer. My education is in architecture and urban planning, but I've actually worked in landscape architecture, and I'm a professor of landscape architecture, but I have no qualifications in landscape architecture. So I'm somebody who very early on wanted to try to figure out from a theoretical and empirical basis how to actually do work in the real world and change things. And I'm looking at the audience here, which looks pretty international, and I don't know what the median age is, but it's a lot younger than me. There's a lot of grey hair up on the stage. But I think one thing I would say about the children, youth and environments is that we were very activist from the beginning, and that's the word that pops into my mind. There's a small band of us. We were very eclectic. Many of us were not researchers at all. In fact, if I'm thinking about some of the characters, I guess my contribution would have started in Los Angeles with Roger in 1971. I was a young, very feisty assistant professor at Berkeley, and we started to think about how to go about this field, and I think we come from a similar kind of place of practicality and knowledge and how to bring them together. And so I put together this idea of Childhood City, which was the next EDRA. So EDRA, I got the list here somewhere, EDRA 4, which was in Blacksburg, Virginia. And in the neighborhood I lived in Berkeley, there was a corner store that was called Sandwich City, right? Remember the time when that word was, I said, okay, this is an interesting term here. So, I'm an urbanist, right? I'm in favor of cities, and I work in cities. And so there was the city part, but also it was a neighborhood thing. It was a gathering place for especially kids coming home from school. It was in a very urban neighborhood, etc. So Childhood City was launched in Blacksburg, Virginia in EDRA 4, which was 1972. And from there on, for several EDRAs in a row, so Childhood City was a 3-day event in EDRA. We had a room that was set aside, and there was food there, and you could hang out and talk to people. There was publications there and stuff going on. So it was kind of the little child and youth hub within the conference. And that went, next year was in Milwaukee. Where's my list? Same concept. And then Lawrence, Vancouver was a big one, right? Raj, we were both there. Because that was alongside Habitat 2, where there was another whole thing going on with the International Association of the Rights to Child's Right to Play at the time that we were also involved in. So, and then I think it sort of started to become solidified, and we were writing. But the Childhood City newsletter, and this is Volume 1, Number 1, started, around the Blacksburg, Milwaukee era, and that, is now the journal right? It went through many, many iterations, and Roger has to take a large level of responsibility for keeping it alive, and the rest of the crew at CUNY. So I'll just make a couple of other comments. So Gary mentioned Bronfenbrenner's work, which has been incredibly important to me. I think it's the frame of reference in our work presently. You know, we're and this is Dr. Costco in the middle, in the front here. Both of us really trying to work on system change in relation to early childhood, because it's a very policy-driven area of business, and so if you can change policy, you've really made some progress. And those other levels in the social ecological model are really important. But our work is driven by a very particular frame, which is Roger Barker's behavior setting theory and the Gibson's affordance theory, and territorial development, which is the area that I always credit Roger with developing, which is depth of territory and extent of territory. These are all very alive concepts that drive our work, and they started, I think, to get going in the beginning area of Childhood City. The other thing I would say is just about the movement. I think it was very international from the beginning. It was actually urban-rural from the beginning. It was very much focused on children's rights because that was moving through the UN at the time. 1989, it was affirmed. And I think, you know, all of us were interested in evidence and how you bring that into the design sector.
Thank you, Robin. I'm going to have to pull you up.
Okay,
Sorry,
done.
but that's a wonderful note to finish on, saying that it is international, it's conciliatory, it's always been a broad church from the beginning in terms of disciplines as well, and that's wonderful, and all those intersections have been so fruitful, as we know. Sorry, time is not on our side.
One thing that I'm amazed none of us mentioned. When all that excitement happened at the beginning, it was related to design, right? Oh, when all that was happening at the beginning, it was related to design and the Environmental Design Research Association. Design and planning, broadly conceived. It was only about 6, 7 years after EDRA was formed from the Design Methods Group that architecture schools started to reject wholesale social and psychological anything. So I just thought we should mention that because a lot of our excitement was killed within the design professions by a complete rejection of that stuff and kicking it out as formalism got re-embraced. I just, in terms of helping understand history, I thought that might be useful.
Yes, Jan Gell talked about changing the mindset, and that became our job, all us people-centered researchers. That was wonderful. Thank you. Barely scratched the surface. Knew they would be like that. Sorry. So now we're going to make it your turn. And we're going to get you to just work with the people that are near you and form a little group. We're going to ask the panel to please distribute themselves through the groups. And we're going to get you to tackle a few more questions about the experience of contemporary children and youth and environments research. And look at possibly 3 things, although we have little time. We'd definitely like you to tackle the challenges that you're all experiencing in this field of work at the moment. We can probably do the gaps and opportunities in the last session. Panel, be warned.
So I will put the questions up front, but I also have some sheets. We know that, like we said, the format of the room changed a little bit, so we know this isn't entirely conducive to this, so if we can just do our best if you feel like taking a little group and moving a little bit further away. But I do have a couple of recording sheets if someone in your group would be willing just to jot down the thoughts that come out of your group. And we won't be sharing it directly back, but the panelists who are going to spread themselves out for the final session will bring some of those thoughts from your groups back to reflect in the finals. So I will pass these around, just gather in groups of 2, 3, 4, or 5, whatever you'd like, and the questions are both here and they'll be up on the front.
Thank you all.
Or sit in the chair behind someone.
want to prioritize the second one?
I will, yeah. Janet?
Okay.
Indy's the priority.
Okay, thank you.
Charles, are you joining in? Charles, are you joining in? You don't have to. Gary's got a lot of people. I've got to get these together.
We even have an official scribe.
You're way ahead of the game. Guys, have a little thoughts collection. Okay. We're doing the challenges, just to focus on the challenges. Okay, we've given you, because Janet is the most thorough person on the earth, she has given you a sheet for all 3 questions, but we do want you to focus particularly on the challenges for this in case we run out of time. We'll pull you up in about 10 minutes or so. Just mere scratch of surface, but you know.
Exactly.
But everybody goes that. Okay, this is a 3-minute warning. 3-minute warning.
Me not be capitalizing.
Okay, everybody, I'm afraid your lovely time together is up. Please may I request the panel return to their key positions on stage for round 3. Wait. That's correct. Thank you. Come on now. I know you're all having a very good time.
So we have to get rules because we don't have a panel representative on
How about you come up this time? Why not, Hilda? That's the end of your fun? It's it. I'm now assembling the challenges. Did you do challenges?
Anyone here on a summary?
Okay, Helen, Lorraine, Robin, I need you, I need you. Gary, Louise, Roger. I don't want to break up your fun, but I need you. Robin, I need you. I need you. Sorry. All right. Thank you, Roger. You take it with you. You need it.
They were together in a group.
You need it. All right. Janet, if you could move our slide on. No. 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 Oh, sort of. That'll do. All right. We're going to kick this session off. We're going to cover two things in the next 5 minutes. And when you hear what they are, you're going to think that's a joke. Never mind. We'll try, and then I'll open the floor up so that you guys can question the panel. So save your burning questions until that point. Panel, we are going to cover what you think are the highest priorities and the greatest opportunities at the moment, and that's just one of the things we're going to cover. The other thing we're going to cover, if you can touch on it briefly, is what you think are the emerging trends in children and youth and environments research that need to be observed and watched and have real potential. Okay, so Louise, I'm going to kick off with you with the opportunities or priorities. You can talk to one. Sorry. Pick an opportunity, pick a priority.
In terms of emerging trends.
You're going to do trends? All right.
All right.
They're very well behaved, not. That's, these panel. Yes?
Okay. Well, I want to pick up. Can we pick up from the discussion we were
Go
just
for your life.
in?
We were hoping you would. Yep.
Because again, as I was saying in our group, I was estimating mean age over on your side of the room and mean age over on our side of the room, and I think it's really critical for us to hear from you in terms of where you want to go and what you see as the most compelling and important directions for CYE research moving into the future. Because I see a lot of people who are the more distant future than we are on this side. And in our group where Gary and I were together, I think, again, the issue of health and well-being came up. And I want to say also, I want to recognize the work Robin and Neil have been doing for many, many years now, also of really putting design research and health and together and looking at that and with children very specifically and bridging the public health and the design research world. So the question of system thinking and Bronfenbrenner, which Gary had opened up, came up, and how do we continue to move forward with the nexus between health and well-being and design research and child and youth development, and certainly I brought up the theme of nature because we had a very limited time, but one of the great gifts of design research is it has been documenting all those spaces that Jan Gale was showing if you were in his presentation this morning, and what it means in terms of opportunities for people's sociality and child development, and really, develop the methods to tell that story. And people sitting here have been telling that story, I think, very well in their careers. And so I think that we have so much evidence of a planetary system that is not healthy in ways that are going to be confronting everyone in more and more ways that nobody can ignore, not politicians, not people on the street. And within that large kind of global environmental, what's happening there, we have human well-being. And again, I think environmental design stands at that nexus. And people say we have to find ways to create resilient environmental systems and natural systems and bring those into our cities, and we have to have social resilience at the same time. And I think, again, design research has been kind of trying to put those pieces together of how do you create resilient social spaces that encourage human resilience, and we have to bring that together with the natural world has to be part of our cities again, and how do we think of resilience in these great big terms. And I may have veered off a bit from our discussion, but
That's excellent. Gary, yes. So you can do a trend, an opportunity, or a high priority. Sorry, it's an either or at this point.
I would say that trying to connect up what we do and what we're interested in more directly with climate change, and thinking about how ultimately most of what's going on comes down to human decisions that we make, and the kind of houses that we live in, the way that we move around in space. And so clearly those things come out of childhood. We don't know yet, I think, enough about how that happens, but I see that as a really critical issue. What's happening in children's lives that does or does not contribute to their understanding, sensitivity to these issues? And related to that also is, I can't help but think as a parent what it must be like for a 10-year-old or a 9-year-old to be hearing these adults arguing about, is the world going to end? Are we going to have a planet? And I think that's a topic that we need to come to grips with. Not a very pleasant one, but I think it's something that's important, because one of the things we know is that a lot of fear and a lot of ambiguity does not lead to good decision making, quite the opposite. So those are two things that I think are both emerging but also really important challenges.
Excellent. Thank you, Gary. All right. Patsy, you're on the spot.
So we were trying, I'll start by a question. Are we going to also come back to a future later? Or are we talking about issues now?
You can go for it now.
Okay.
So now we have trends, opportunities, key high priorities and future priorities. No, small agenda.
That's a whole bag full of things. So so I'll start with some of the things that came out in our group and in the discussion. A couple of things that I will highlight it is one, and it actually related to something I had triggered for myself for thinking about where we go, and that's one of the challenges people have is the mindset of others, the mindset of parents, the mindset of politicians, the mindset of other decision makers. And so how do we work within that? How do you give them information? How do you share that information? And I think that is a challenge for us that we really need to take on. And because we really need to be the advocates in many cases, and we need to help young people be their own advocates. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity there, as well as seeing that as a challenge there now. I think that's something that's really important. And another thing that came up, I liked the question, is, am I doing it right? I think that was something that we've all struggled with, not knowing whether or not you're doing it right. And I will just say, I've struggled at EDRA many times of sitting in a session and having a presentation and rolling my eyes and going, oh, did they not read that paper? It's like, did they not already know somebody tried that? But I've come to the point, it's okay to try things again, right? Because just because I tried something and it didn't work doesn't mean when you try it, it's not going to work. And so I think it's important that we really make an effort to understand what's come previously, but also understanding the context of what we're doing things. If where we're doing our own work and our own projects is always going to vary. And so it's always hard to say, just because, someone has written about and said, this is not how you should engage young people, or this is what we're going to do, may not necessarily apply to yours. So I think the question is a good one, is, am I doing it right? That we should continue to ask ourselves, but that's an okay question to be asking. Right, I think the fact that you're asking it is a good one, and so that's really important. The other thing we actually sort of started with is thinking about smart cities and technology, and I was thinking about this morning, the session that we were in was talking about the screen time and how screen time is increasing for the young people, and one thing I'm thinking about for the future is, let's stop complaining about it and think about, well, how do we engage young people on their own terms? I have a daughter who's 22. She's a graphic designer. She's spending a lot of time now designing Instagrammable spaces. right? So she's working in Los Angeles. She just sent me a drawing she's doing for Toyota. They're doing an exhibit at the new Rams Stadium. They want to design it so people take their photo for Instagram, right? And so and I have a student now, one of my undergrads, working on a city, thinking about how do I design this to get the young people to come out in the community so they can take a really cool photo at this park or in this urban plaza, right? So how do we not just say, oh, they're sitting on their screen? How do we actually think about that technology and get more engaged in that technology, and how can we use that going forward? So how we can push ourselves. So I think I'll leave it there. There's a couple of other things, but.
Thank you, Patsy, very much. All right. So the way I'm going to draw the other four in the panel into the mix is via your questions. So beginning with Helen. Does anyone in the audience have a question for Helen about her work I'm assuming you're familiar with a lot of the work that these people have done. They've been magnificent contributors to the field for a long time. Does anyone have a question for Helen? All right then. So Helen, you still get your 2 bobs worth. What do you want us to do with this opportunity of children and youth research from this point?
Okay, I was prepared to talk about the challenges. Can I just say something that came out of the group, because we did talk about some challenges.
Go for that.
And I think it's about the changing environment in which research is done, whether you're in a university or particularly if you're in a university, because the work that Roger and Robin did, or Robin and Roger, I don't want to prioritise them, couldn't be done now by men because of ethical fears about men and children. And even to do it, if they were women or if they were just about they'd have to go through this ethical process, or you would in our country, I guess you would here. And that makes some people fearful of doing that sort of research. But it shouldn't be a fearful process, because it should just be embedded in our thinking and should be part of how we develop the methodology. And what I wanted to say about one of the great contributions of CYE has been over the 50 years, so this is going back again, sorry, is the development of a whole series of methods that have come from the work of which are amazing. I still see students say, I'm going to do this, it's a new thing. No, it isn't. Look back at Roger and Robin's work. They were doing this 50 years ago. So I think that's really important. So changes... Sorry? Oh, there's a quote here from the 80s. We had problems finding a legitimate photograph of latchkey children, but felt pressured to keep up our reputation by providing interesting and relevant photographs. That includes from Roger. So the ethics is much more formalised in our systems, and together with that we talked about funding can be an issue, even to go from one country to another, and that perhaps sometimes collaboration in bigger groups. I think some of us have worked one thin. I know in my department, my university, I'm almost one thin. You have master's students and PhDs who become the future, but funding opportunities in our country are particularly looking for big multidisciplinary things. So I think going forward, you need to be working with health workers, with psychologists. My first colleague was environmental psychologist Chris Spencer, who died about a year ago, I'm sorry to say. But, you know, you have to not work by yourself. You've got to, at an early stage in your career, get networked in. So shall I leave it at that?
Thank you, Helen. That would be wonderful. Roger. Who has a question for Roger in the room? Anybody have a question for Roger? Okay, Roger. Go for your life. Hang on.
Okay. So when you are doing a longitudinal look back at the initial communities that you studied decades ago, I figure the lifestyles of children have changed quite dramatically. And that was one of the conversations in our group was, how do we remind ourselves that as we evolve as a field, the lifestyle of children is evolving in parallel. And so how do we stay current with what the pressing issues are? That was one thing Nelda brought up. But how do we embrace, a new wave of technology, a new fear of potential devastating environmental effects? How do we continue to, evolve with the world, with young people?
Great question.
Tiny, too. You've got 1 minute.
Yeah. I think I can say it fast because I thought about it. Yeah, I mean, returning to to that town that I studied after 35 years, which I did 10 years ago, and then trying to write it up. It's the hardest thing I've done in my life. Doing the original study where I could walk free through the whole town, never even spoke to adults all day long, 2.5 years of just being with kids like a second childhood was a doddle. Going back now, my original kids came to the door and were excited to see me. But when they called their kids down, it was like, oh, an adult? We're not interested in seeing one of them. Whereas before, it was so special to be an adult because their world was a peer world. So you can't even begin to do this. So the idea that I could do anything that was methodological imperative was out the window completely right away. What do we do now, though? I think we need to get better at not only listening to children, and it's happening so fast, right? But listening to children and parents in dialogue, which happened in this research by accident. So I go and interview their parents, and the kids, especially with the middle school level kids, they'd come downstairs and start arguing with the parents about what they were telling me. And because, I didn't tell you, I've now done another 10 years on because I've been so slow at getting this bloody book written. So last year I went back, and now it's all about digital technology. So the new parents in town are dealing with that, as well as my old parents who happen to have some younger kids, and they're all saying the same thing. But it has to be with the voices of adolescent perspectives alongside the parents, because it's a struggle. And I can't get the struggle by just listening to one side. And so that brings it right up to date then, because you're hearing some of the, even with myself, my 7-year-old, which I fight to, he knows how to steal my iPhone. He knows, constantly got all these strategies. But thank God he always goes to SimCity. SimCity is the most exciting thing. So he's actually doing environmental planning. So
Fantastic. Thank you, Roger. Okay, anybody got a question for Lorraine? Okay, Lorraine, what would you like us to do with this opportunity?
I think that a combination of what I think are some opportunities and challenges and what came out of our group. I think our field is lacking in research and understanding of special populations, children on the autism spectrum, and how they relate to the physical and digital environments. Children with a range other disabilities in terms of learning disabilities or physical disabilities and how they interact with the physical environment. I also think our research has been weird. We primarily deal with Western educated countries and populations, and we have said almost nothing about sub-Saharan Africa. We also don't understand perhaps a lot about populations within the United States that are not white and privileged. And so, and that also goes to the fact of the pipeline, and I'm looking at all of you because you're the pipeline, you're the researchers of the future, and how do we reach out to encouraging researchers, because it's not enough for Americans to go to Asia or to sub-Saharan Africa or countries in South America to do the research to understand children's environments, but to encourage and develop researchers there in understanding those things. So that's been one of my issues with EDRA and IAPS and others that I would like to see more of. So I think that those are major challenges. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Lorraine. Wonderful. Okay, Robin. Lucky last again. Sorry, not intentional. Don't take it personally. Your turn. Would anybody like to ask Robin a question? Robin? A minute's reflection, perhaps, on what the future of children and youth research is, and then we shall call it to a close.
Okay, so the notes that I wrote down here, trends, nature is definitely on the agenda that didn't exist 15 years ago. I was just in the it's the biannual conference of the Children and Nature Network, and there was 800 people there. The previous gathering was almost 1,000 in Vancouver. So this is a really interesting phenomenon that happened as a result of one book, one really well done, well-researched book, Last Child in the Woods. Most of you probably know the book. And so there's the whole growth of interest in and support and activism around children and nature. So I think that's quite hopeful, right? We all need a lot of hope these days. And hopefully that, and I can speak to our work, starting to work with very young children from year 0 will lead to, adults that have a really good sense of our human dependency on the biosphere. So bioconservation would be a really important, really perhaps the most important issue. And Nilda makes this point about, once the species is gone, it's gone. Maybe climate change is a more fluid kind of thing. It's not there or not there. It's a continuous variable, whereas a species is not. Opportunities, I think, I thought of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, which has become very much a public topic, and really good research that shows that this is a real thing, an area of business, and that children today are under tremendous kinds of pressures and constraints that are very, very unhealthy. And so we need to somehow embrace those issues in a very positive kind of way and figure out what to do about it. We were talking in our group, and I didn't take the notes, one of my colleagues did there, but we were talking a little bit about the environment behavior area of business, which EDRA represents, that hasn't gone anywhere in the universities as far as I can see. And that's a really big problem in terms of practicing professionals. The ones we work quite a bit with practicing professionals, and they have no clue about children. They really don't have any idea. And they do stupid things just like they did decades ago. They waste money and screws up things. So, I mean, as a priority, that is the biggest one for me, is to somehow find a way of communicating the knowledge that we are creating and really influence the design professions and help them understand, and maybe help their clients understand that design has to be done from an evidence base and not just as something off the top of my head.
Thank you, Robin. And I know several of the members of the panel have gone back through all the journals, and Patsy here has brought some table of contents, and you'll be surprised at how continuous some of these themes are. They've been persistent, I should say. They've been with us since day one, and they're still with us. Maybe we know a little more.
Just share them amongst yourselves after.
It's going to be a drinking game at the social tonight.
For sure. But it is interesting that some of them still have a long journey to go before we really understand many of these themes we've been pursuing a long time. Thank you all. I'm going to hand over to Janet now to wrap up the session. Please can we collect your notes that you took from the group sessions, because we'd like to do something with that, which Janet will talk about. Thank you for coming, and please join me in thanking the panel for their contribution to today.
Thank you, and thank you, Kate, for facilitating those conversations. I have to say, when we originally invited this group, we expected to have maybe 3 that agreed to come, and everybody responded and said, yes, we're coming, so which was wonderful, and we were so excited to have, this is very, interesting point, so that we have this little time at this conference to take a moment and reflect back where we've come from and also where we're going. Kate and I are particularly interested, certainly in the field in general, but also as co-chairs of this network, how can the network support this work, both individually and collectively. And one thing we haven't been doing is really leveraging this network enough. So there are some mechanisms for conversations, but we really welcome. We'd like everybody to be reaching out, getting more involved, and certainly reflecting on this session. We're going to prepare some sort of publication, and we sent out a list. If you're interested in being on the receiving list, the receiving end of that, please leave us your email before you leave. And we are very, very much open to suggestions about how this network can continue to support you individually and us collectively. Because as a group, we have a significant amount of potential and power, as Robin said, as activists and as the advocates, not just the researchers and practitioners. So 2 things to mention. Tomorrow at lunchtime, we have the network meeting. The CYE network meeting is tomorrow at lunch. It's always difficult because you have 45 minutes to get your lunch and attend the meeting. If you can plan and grab something that you can bring with you, it's on the 2nd floor. It's in the schedule on the 2nd floor of Building 6 tomorrow at 12:15. And we are going to be reflecting a little bit on this session, but we're also going to be highlighting a number of the recent CYE publications that have come out, both, as Kate mentioned, Rutledge and New Village Press. New Village, thank you, Louise. Have a couple of, we've requested them to bring some CYE-specific materials, so please check that out. But some of the authors are going to be at the meeting tomorrow to talk a little bit about those recent books or forthcoming ones. And finally, we always, during EDRA Now, we try to have a little social evening tonight. For anyone who's interested in just joining us for a quick drink, little appetizer, we are going to a little brewery/restaurant. It's a few minutes from here, just for about an hour and a bit. So if you'd like to join us, meet us at the registration desk at 7. And it's just a short little social event, so you may have a chance to talk to some of the panelists a little bit more. Thank you all for your participation. I know this wasn't the most conducive format. We appreciate everybody being good sports, and to Kate, and once again, just our sincere thanks for all of you, not only for attending, but just for the work and the pioneering that you've done. And I think your legacy is going to be well supported here.
Organizing this.
Yes, thanks everybody.
So I think there are 2 travelling pages collecting email addresses for those who want to stay connected to what we do next. So put your name on them.
Sorry,
Janet?
One last note. I'm going to hand it to Helen, who is going to be speaking again this afternoon. I just wanted you can share the details of your talk.
5:15, and it's a backwards-forwards looking one about children using.
Okay, so another at 5:15. Okay, in the sessions go till 6:30 today. So if you're interested, please look for that session, and then feel free to join us at 7 at the registration desk to continue the chat. Thank you.
Okay, I have 1 email form. Do I have another one? Thank you. Do you want to sign one? Thank you. Please write so we can read it.
In case it's available in a British journal. Yeah. Let me answer.
Oh, very nice to meet you. Sorry, you're just...
I was here and then I had to step out for a bit. So.
Oh, we missed you.
I heard the first part.